America isn't afraid of BYD's cars. It's afraid of what BYD proves. Washington has spent years building a careful public argument, data privacy risks, unfair state subsidies, manufacturing quality concerns, and every single one of those arguments is a misdirection. A story designed to sound reasonable, long enough to avoid the conversation that actually terrifies every Pentagon briefing room and every Wall Street boardroom on Earth. Because that real conversation has nothing to do with electric vehicles. It has everything to do with what happens to the promise America has made to the world for a century. The promise that free markets produce better products than state-directed industry the day an ordinary consumer stands between two cars, looks at two price tags, and simply chooses the better one. That day isn't approaching. It's already here. And the consequences are bigger than anyone in Washington is ready to admit publicly. The official story America is selling. You've heard the arguments. BYD's cars are a national security threat. Their software harvests your location data and sends it straight to Beijing. Their prices are artificially low because the Chinese government is bankrolling every vehicle that rolls off the line. And their manufacturing quality? Not up to American standards. That's the official story. Clean, logical, and easy to sell to the public. In 2024, the Biden administration slapped a 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles. 100%. You heard that right. That's the same rate America charges on goods from countries it considers economic enemies. To put that in perspective, the U.S. tariff on Japanese cars is 2.5%. On German cars, 2.5%. But BYD gets 100%. The message was loud and clear. These cars are not welcome here. But here's where it starts to unravel. The data privacy argument. The idea that BYD vehicles are secretly collecting your location, your habits, your daily movements sounds terrifying. And it would be, if the same argument were being applied consistently. It isn't. TikTok, Shein, and dozens of Chinese apps with direct access to American consumer data operate inside the US with far less resistance than a car that hasn't even entered the market yet. And if data collection were truly the concern, you'd expect the same 100% tariff on every connected device manufactured in China. You don't see that. Then there's the subsidy argument that BYD only wins on price because Beijing writes the checks. And yet, American automakers have received hundreds of billions in government support over the decades, from the 2009 bailout to the Inflation Reduction Act's EV tax credits. The subsidy argument, applied honestly, cuts in every direction. Every official reason Washington has given for keeping BYD out collapses the moment you apply it equally. And that collapse points to something much bigger hiding underneath, because the real reason has never been about the cars. Why the arguments fall apart. You'd think if America's concern was genuinely about data, privacy, every Chinese-made connected device would face the same wall. But Toyota collects your location data. Volkswagen collects your driving behavior. Every modern vehicle from every manufacturer on Earth is a rolling data center, and none of them are facing a 100% tariff. The argument was never applied consistently because it was never meant to be. It was meant to sound convincing long enough to avoid the real conversation. The subsidy accusation falls apart just as fast. In 2023, the Inflation Reduction Act handed American EV manufacturers billions in direct consumer incentives, production credits, and infrastructure investment. General Motors alone received over $50 billion in government support between 2009 and 2019. If state support disqualifies a company from competing, America's own automakers don't survive that standard. But this wasn't just about logical inconsistency. This was about buying time. Every argument Washington made publicly was designed not to win a debate, but to delay a reckoning. And the reckoning is this. The arguments don't hold because they were never the point. But the story gets significantly darker from here. What's said behind closed door strip? Away the public arguments, and you're left with a silence that says everything. No senior American official has ever stood at a podium and said the quiet part out loud, that the real fear isn't what BYD's cars do to American consumers. It's what BYD's existence does to American credibility. Because that's a sentence you cannot say without triggering the exact panic you're trying to manage. Behind closed doors, the conversation is different. Intelligence briefings on BYD don't lead with data harvesting. They lead with market projection models showing BYD's global market share trajectory, its production cost curve, its battery technology advancement rate, and what those numbers look like in 2030 if nothing changes. Those numbers are the national security threat, not the software, not the cameras, the trajectory. In 2023, BYD sold 1.8 million fully electric vehicles globally. For context, that's more EVs than the entire American automotive industry combined. You heard that right. One Chinese company outselling every American manufacturer in the electric vehicle segment simultaneously. The briefing rooms didn't need a threat assessment after that number landed. The number was the assessment. And what terrified strategists most wasn't where BYD was. It was how fast it got there. But what BYD represents goes far beyond a sales figure, and that's where the real story begins. BYD is a proof of concept. Here's what most people miss entirely. BYD is not competing with Ford and GM. BYD is demonstrating something. It is the live, real-world, undeniable proof that China's industrial strategy, the one Western economists spent 20 years calling unsustainable, actually works. Enter an industry at the bottom. Get laughed at. Invest relentlessly in vertical integration. Control your supply chain from raw material to finished product. Then surface at the top, with a better product at a lower price than anyone thought possible. BYD makes its own battery cells. It designs its own chips. It manufactures its own motors, its own power electronics, its own vehicle platforms. When a global semiconductor shortage crippled Ford and GM production in 2021 and 2022, BYD redesigned around it in weeks. That's not luck. That's the structural advantage of owning every layer of your supply chain simultaneously. The result is a cost base that no American manufacturer can match through efficiency alone. BYD's blade battery technology is not just cheaper to produce. It is by measurable technical standards safer and more energy dense than the cell chemistry used by most Western competitors. The product is not a compromise. It is genuinely better. And that's the part that breaks the narrative completely, because if this were just about cheap manufacturing, America could absorb it. But this is a superior product at a lower price, and that combination is the one outcome the Western economic model's defenders never prepared a real answer for. But here's what makes it truly terrifying. BYD was never meant to stop at cars. The template is already replicating. What if the car was never the destination? What if it was always just the proof of concept, the visible, undeniable demonstration that the strategy works before China deployed the same playbook across every strategic industry on Earth simultaneously? Because that's exactly what's happening. While Washington was focused on BYD's market share numbers, China was running the same vertical integration strategy in solar panel manufacturing, in lithium-ion battery production, in commercial shipbuilding, in industrial robotics, and in rare earth processing, not sequentially, simultaneously. And in almost every category, the trajectory looks identical to what BYD's curve looked like 10 years ago, which means the reckoning in those industries is coming. And it's coming fast. China now controls over 80% of the world's solar panel manufacturing capacity. It processes over 90% of the world's rare earth elements, the materials inside every EV battery, every wind turbine, every advanced weapon system America builds. Its shipbuilding output is now more than the rest of the world combined. In commercial robotics, Chinese manufacturers are capturing market share from Japanese and German suppliers at a rate that mirrors BYD's early EV growth curve almost exactly. This is not coincidence. This is execution. BYD didn't accidentally become the world's largest EV manufacturer. It was a deliberate, state-aligned, decades-long strategy, and the same strategy is being run in parallel across every sector that defines 21st century economic power. And the single most explosive part of this story is why BYD, specifically, is the one keeping American strategists awake at night, more than Huawei, more than DeepSeek, more than any other name on the list. Why BYD terrifies more than Huawei. Huawei built telecommunications infrastructure. DeepSeek built an AI model. Both sent shockwaves through Washington, and both were contained within a specific technical domain that most ordinary people never directly interact with. You can ban Huawei from a network. You can restrict DeepSeek from government devices. You can keep both arguments inside boardrooms and congressional hearings where the public never has to confront them personally. You cannot do that with a car. A car sits in your driveway. Your neighbor sees it. Your coworker asks about it. Your son wants one. The automobile is not an abstract technology threat. It is the single most emotionally loaded consumer product in the history of Western civilization. It represents freedom, aspiration, industrial might, and national identity in a way that no router or language model ever could. When America looks at BYD, it isn't looking at a competitor in a technical category. It's looking at a direct challenge to the most powerful symbol of Western industrial superiority ever created. And BYD didn't just enter that symbol's territory. It came in with longer range, faster charging, more standard features, and a lower price tag, simultaneously beating manufacturers who have spent over a century perfecting exactly this product. Ford has been building cars since 1903, General Motors since 1908. BYD has been building electric vehicles seriously for less than 2 decades. And it won. That timeline is what makes this existential rather than competitive, because it doesn't just threaten market share. It threatens the central argument Western capitalism has made about itself for 100 years, that free markets, private capital, and consumer-driven competition produce the best products on earth. BYD is a state-aligned company, and it just built a better car. That argument doesn't recover quietly. And the people in those briefing rooms know it. But the broken promise goes even deeper than industrial competition, and what it does to America's economic story is where this gets truly devastating. The promise that just broke for a century. The Western economic model rested on a promise, not a written one, an implied one. The promise that free markets, driven by competition and private innovation, would always outproduce, out-innovate, and out-quality any state-directed alternative. It was the foundational argument of every trade negotiation, every sanctions regime, every technology export control America ever deployed. We don't need to control the market, we just need to compete in it, because our system produces better outcomes. BYD just broke that promise in the most public, most measurable, most consumer-facing way imaginable. This isn't a theoretical policy debate anymore. It's a product comparison that any ordinary person can make standing in a showroom. BYD's Seal sedan competes directly with the Tesla Model 3 and the BMW 3 Series, and in independent consumer reviews across Europe, Australia, and Southeast Asia. It is matching or beating both on range, interior technology, and price simultaneously. The Model 3 starts at around $40,000 in most markets. The BYD Seal starts at roughly $25,000. For a comparable or superior product, that gap is not a rounding error. That is the Western premium evaporating in real time. And here's the part that truly cannot be walked back. Once a consumer experiences that value gap personally, once they sit in both cars, compare both price tags, and make a rational choice, no amount of tariff rhetoric reverses that perception. The product has spoken. And the product is saying something Washington desperately does not want the world to hear. Because the moment that verdict spreads from Australia to Canada to Germany to Brazil, it doesn't just shift car sales. It shifts the global narrative about which economic system actually delivers for ordinary people. And that narrative shift is something no export control can stop. But Washington did try to stop it. And the way it tried tells you everything about whether America actually believes it can compete. Tariffs are a confession. When you are confident in your product, you compete. When you are not, you ban. That's not a political opinion. It's a pattern visible across every industry and every era of economic history without exception. The moment a dominant player stops responding to competition with better products and starts responding with barriers, you are watching a system broadcast its own self-doubt in the clearest language available. And America just broadcast it at 100%. The Biden administration's tariff on Chinese electric vehicles wasn't a trade policy, it was a signal. And the signal wasn't directed at Beijing. It was directed at every boardroom, every government ministry, and every consumer market on earth that was watching to see how America would respond to BYD's rise. The response was, "You are not allowed in here. Not, we will build something better. Not, we will close the cost gap through investment and innovation. A wall, a number. 100%. To understand how extraordinary that number is, consider the context. The standard American tariff on imported passenger vehicles is 2.5%. That's the rate applied to cars from Japan, Germany, South Korea, and the United Kingdom, countries whose automotive industries directly compete with Ford and GM every single day in the American market. BYD, a company whose vehicles are not even sold in America, received a tariff 40 times higher than the rate applied to manufacturers who actually are competing on American soil. That is not a proportionate trade response. That is a declaration that the normal rules of competition do not apply here. And the rest of the world read that declaration with perfect clarity. Because every market that isn't behind America's wall watched what happened next. In Europe, BYD became the fastest-growing automotive brand across multiple countries within a single sales cycle. In Thailand, it became the best-selling EV brand outright. In Australia, it went from zero market presence to a top 3 EV seller in under 2 years. In Brazil, its dealer network expanded faster than any foreign manufacturer in the country's modern history. The tariff kept BYD out of America. It did absolutely nothing to keep BYD out of the world. And that contrast, America building a wall while the rest of the world opened its doors and discovered the product was genuinely better, created a split screen moment that no amount of national security rhetoric could close. On one side of the screen, American consumers are paying $40,000 for an EV with 300 miles of range. On the other side, Australian and European consumers paying $25,000 for a comparable or superior product from a manufacturer America deemed too dangerous to compete against. The tariff didn't protect American consumers. It protected American manufacturers from having to answer a question they weren't ready to answer. And every day, the wall stays up. The question gets louder. Because while Washington was building barriers, BYD was building something far more dangerous than a car. The supply chain beneath everything. You can ban the car. You cannot ban the materials inside it. And that distinction is where America's strategic position stops looking uncomfortable and starts looking genuinely dangerous, because the battery supply chain that powers every electric vehicle on Earth, including every American one, runs almost entirely through China. The tariff addressed the product at the end of the line. It touched nothing at the beginning of it. China processes over 90% of the world's rare earth elements. It refines over 60% of the world's lithium. It produces over 75% of the world's battery cells. The mines might be in Australia, Chile, or the Democratic Republic of Congo, but the processing, the refining, the cell manufacturing, and the battery assembly happen overwhelmingly inside China's industrial ecosystem. The ore leaves the ground in another country and arrives in China as raw material. It leaves China as the most strategically valuable component in the 21st century global economy. That's not a supply chain vulnerability. That's a chokehold. And BYD doesn't just benefit from this supply chain. Through its subsidiary investments, its upstream mineral agreements, and its decades of vertical integration, BYD is woven into the architecture that controls it. When you buy a BYD vehicle, you are not buying a product that happens to use Chinese batteries. You are purchasing the end result of a supply chain that China designed, built, and now owns from the ground up. And that supply chain has no serious Western alternative yet in existence. But here's what makes this truly devastating. Even as America bans BYD vehicles from its market, American EV manufacturers are sourcing materials from the very supply chain China dominates. Ford's battery joint venture, GM's cell supply agreements. The raw material contracts underpinning almost every domestic EV production line trace back, at some point, to Chinese-controlled refining and processing capacity. The car is banned. The dependency underneath the car is not only intact, it's deepening every year as EV adoption accelerates and demand for battery materials increases. Then came the part of the story nobody in Washington wanted to say out loud. BYD's Blade battery technology, its proprietary lithium iron phosphate cell design, is not staying inside cars. It is being licensed and deployed in grid-scale energy storage systems, in commercial vehicle fleets, in residential energy infrastructure, across dozens of countries simultaneously. Australia is running BYD energy storage on its grid. Europe is contracting BYD battery systems for renewable energy projects. Southeast Asia is building EV charging infrastructure around BYD's ecosystem. The car was the headline that everyone watched. The energy storage architecture quietly being installed beneath the global economy was the actual strategic position being constructed the entire time. Banning the vehicle didn't touch any of that. The wall went up around the most visible thing and left everything foundational completely exposed. And that gap between what the ban addressed and what it utterly failed to address is the single clearest measure of how far behind America's strategic response actually is. The final chapter of this story isn't about policy failures or supply chain maps. It's about one specific moment, a moment happening right now, in showrooms across 4 continents, and what that moment means for everything America has staked its global identity on. The verdict already being delivered. This is the moment Washington cannot legislate away. Not with tariffs, not with national security briefings, not with congressional hearings or export controls, or any other instrument of state power available to the most powerful government on earth. Because this moment doesn't happen in a policy chamber. It happens in a parking lot. It happens in a showroom. It happens when an ordinary person in Melbourne or Toronto or Berlin or Bangkok stands between 2 cars, looks at 2 price tags, and makes a completely rational decision. That person is not thinking about geopolitics. They are not thinking about which economic system deserves to win the 21st century. They are thinking about their family, their commute, their budget, and which car gives them the most for what they have. And increasingly, in market after market across 4 continents, that person is choosing BYD, not because they were told to, not because of subsidies or propaganda or state pressure, because the product is better and the price is lower, and the choice is obvious once you remove the politics and just look at the cars. That moment, multiplied by millions of individual consumers across dozens of countries, is not a sales statistic, it is a verdict. And it is a verdict on something far larger than automotive market share. For a century, the Western economic model's greatest argument wasn't military power or diplomatic reach. It was the product on the shelf. The implicit promise was always that free markets, private capital, and competitive innovation would produce superior outcomes for ordinary people. That promise was the ideological engine behind every trade agreement, every development loan, every foreign policy decision that carried the subtext of "follow our model, and your people will have better lives and better products." It was the argument that won the Cold War. It was the argument that justified the entire post-war international economic order America built and led. BYD is dismantling that argument, 1 car sale at a time, not in a debate, not in an academic paper. In the most democratic, most irrefutable forum that exists in a market economy, consumer choice, and consumer choice, expressed freely across markets that haven't built walls, is returning a verdict that no American strategist prepared a real answer for. The terror isn't that BYD will one day sell cars in America. The terror is that it doesn't need to. The verdict is being delivered everywhere else. In every market where a consumer chooses the better car at the lower price, the story America told the world about why its economic model is superior gets quieter. And in every market where BYD's charging network expands, where its battery storage goes into the grid, where its vehicles become the default, the alternative story gets louder. America is not afraid of the car. America is afraid of the moment the world stops asking which system is better and simply looks at the evidence already sitting in millions of driveways across every continent except one. That moment isn't coming. It's already here.